Hristos воскресе! Let us be attentive. At that time, when Jesus was passing, he saw a man blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but the works of God might be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him who sent me, while it is day, night comes, when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. As he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and anointed the man's eyes with the clay, saying to him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which meant sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar said, Is not this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, It is he. Others said, No, but he is like him. He said, I am the man. They said to him, Then how were your eyes opened? He answered, The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. The Pharisees asked him, How had he received his sight? He said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, How can a man who is a sinner do such signs? There was a division among them. So they again said to the blind man, What do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes? He said, He is a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight, until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight, and they asked them, Is this your son, who was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but how he now sees, we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself. His parents said this because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess him to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, He is of age, ask him. So for the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered, Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you too want to become his disciples? And they reviled him, saying, You are his disciples, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, Why, this is a marvel. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has he been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us? And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, Do you believe in the Son of God? He answered, And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, You have seen him, and it is he who speaks to you. He said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him.
Glory to you, O Lord. Glory to you. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and to those
risen.
Truly he is risen.
Χριστός ανέστη.
Allegros anesti.
Χριστός βουσκρέσει.
Hoy is so much.
In my opinion, should be able to sing the hymn all year round, but today will be the last day, right? Sunday of the man born blind. It's the last day before the Ascension. Now, the reason why this is the last day, the reason why that this is commemorated on the last day before the Ascension, the last day of the Pentecostalium, is that this is typically the day right after this is when all the catechumens would then start being baptized. They were newly illumined, right? They were able to see clearly. So that's why there's a little bit of trivia that this is the last day before the Ascension. One of the heroes I think that all of us have been used to hearing about all through our childhood was the story of Samson, right? Everybody kind of knows who Samson is. He's got the long hair, and he was strong, right? He was very strong. Samson did many miraculous things, including being born of these people that were very, very elderly. They should have never been able to have children, right? But when the angel of the Lord came, told him, Samson was born, they were able to have a child. Now, Samson's story is found in the book of Judges, and of course, the book of Judges, through translation and everything like that, it's kind of a bad translation. It should have been more of commanders or generals. But anyway, Samson's story is found in the book of Judges. So if you want to read about him in more detail, you can go there. But Samson was this phenomenal person, right? He was pretty phenomenal. He was told at the beginning, his mother was even instructed, do not drink anything strong, wine, do not do this, and always instruct your son to never cut his hair, because if you cut his hair, what happens, we know, he loses his strength. So Samson had the strength that was from God. And there's many different examples, right? There's the example of him actually tearing off the walls of one of the city, the gates of one of the city. He tears it completely off, frame and all. It's not like a door like this. It's more of a door like what Brett is sitting in, even bigger, because the horses and the carts would have to go by it. And they tried to lock him in so they could capture him. And Samson, in the middle of the night, grabbed the gates and tore it completely off the wall, and then carried it 30 miles. Okay? And then at another point, Samson was being surrounded, and he picked up not a sword and not a club, but he picked up what? The jawbone of an ass, right? That was sitting there, about 9 inches long, maybe 10 inches long. And it says in the scriptures that he killed 1,000 Philistines with that jawbone. That was a pretty good amount of work. How long do you think it would take to kill 1,000 people with the jawbone of an ass? But the Spirit of the Lord would come upon Samson, right? The Spirit of the Lord was upon him so he could begin the deliverance of the people of Israel from the bondage and the power of the Philistines, right? We see the Philistines throughout the scriptures. We know that David fought Goliath, which was a Philistine, so you can imagine how long that this people were in bondage by the Philistines. But Samson, he had this problem, right? He had a couple of problems, actually. First of all, he had a very, very bad temper. Extremely bad temper, right? He had done things that were contrary to the law, and one day he was walking along, he killed a lion with his bare hands. He left the carcass there, and then another day he was walking by after the lion had died, right? And he found that there's honey inside there, so he reaches in, grabs the honey, takes it home to his parents, and they all eat honey, which is a no-no for the Jews, right? Because they weren't even supposed to touch anybody or anything that was dead. It would defile them. Samson didn't care about those things. Samson cared only about himself. Okay? And he was attracted to these women that did not belong to his people. He was supposed to have married this woman. He gave the riddle at this wedding. and his wife harassed him until he told them the answer. And because she betrayed him, he kills 30 people. Right? Anger problems. Talk about anger problems. Samson happened. Okay? And then after he did that feat, later on with the jawbone, that's when he kind of settled down. And for 20 years, he judged, or he was protecting the people from the Philistines. And then one day, we know the famous story about Delilah that comes, the famous Samson and Delilah story. And because Delilah was paid so much, it says that she was paid 20 or 30,000 silver shekels. Now, can you imagine that this amount that she was paid was 500 years or more worth of wages for a person? 500 years. Nobody could make that in a lifetime. But they said, we want you to figure it out. So this beautiful woman goes out to Samson, and because of his lust, he saw that she was beautiful. And she convinced him in the long run to tell her what the source of the strength was. And in the scriptures it actually says it wasn't his whole head of hair, it was 7 strands of his hair. And she shaved his head off. And the one thing that they did before they threw him grinding grain into the jail was they gouged out his eyes. So while he was down there in the jail doing his strength, right, they were celebrating to their gods. It says that they were celebrating and sacrificing to their gods, that they had, the gods had delivered this enemy Samson to them. But while he was down there, his hair started to grow. And they called him, right? They called him up so they could make fun of him. His hair had already grown in. This is many years later. I'm giving you a very, very short synopsis of the story. And he was brought into the temple where there was the 2 columns. And as they were celebrating and making fun of him, and they brought him in to perform, as we know the famous story, Samson pushed the columns apart, killing more people in his death than he did in his life. And one of his final prayers was, Lord, give me the strength one more time so that I can have vengeance on my enemies that took my eyes. Even in his death, Samson's anger was there. But it wasn't until he lost his physical sight that he really relied on God. That is the whole thing about Samson, is that he had his sight. He was able to see clearly. And he was turned his head because he was so angry, because he was so lustful, he couldn't bear going through life without lusting after what he wanted and his desires. But when he lost his physical sight, that's when he began to get his spiritual eyes in his life. Today, during the epistle reading, we see a group of men that are benefiting over a woman that had a spirit of divination. She was possessed. And these guys were benefiting off of her ability, off of her possession. Talk about spiritual blindness. Talk about being blind. This woman was able to see, but she was blind because of the demonic possession. And the people that were making money off of her were completely spiritually blind. And then when Paul came along, as we just read, he rebuked the demon. And they were very angry, and they threw him into the jail. Right? But Paul didn't stop there. When he was in the jail, as we read many times, he was still ministering. He was still praising God. And then the doors were open. Then the jailer came in, and he was afraid. He was going to drop himself on the sword. Paul said, no, don't. We're still here. And that day, that jailer, he found his salvation. A person that had been born with his eyes all of his life. That day when he came in and found Paul and saw Paul, and Paul was able to witness, was that light to the world to that jail. And that day, he gained his sight. He was able to see for the first time clearly, and he was baptized. It's a beautiful story, which leads us to our gospel lesson. The man who was born physically blind, all his life not being able to see, all his life not being able to see the trees or the people before him, living in darkness. But in my opinion, when Jesus came up to him and started talking to him, this guy, when Jesus made that mud in his hand and wiped it on the man's eyes and told him to go and wash, that guy didn't argue at all, unlike the paralytic. I have no one to take me to the pool. This man, he just gets up and goes and washes his eyes and was able to see. And then he goes in before the Pharisees, and because Jesus had done these things during the Sabbath, as we have read many times before, the people that were truly blind were the people that were ridiculing him and reviling him and ended up throwing him out because of his witness about Jesus. And when Jesus heard that he had been thrown out, he asked the man, "Do you believe? Who is it, sir, that I may believe? It is I, the man that you see now, the person that is talking to you now, that I am the Son of Man. I believe." This guy had been blind all of his life and wasn't able to truly see physically until Jesus made manifest that guy's faith had been there all along, no matter whether or not he could physically see or not. Samson had his sight. Samson was strong. Samson was sent by God. But he was blind. He was blind to his rage. He was blind to his lust. He was blind to his sin. Just like the Pharisees and the Sadducees that reviled and persecuted and sought after Jesus, they just could not see. I remember, I've said this before, when my spiritual father, about 20 years ago, he told me, "Demetri, I have been a priest for over 20 years, but I have only known Christ. He's been a priest for over 40 years, but I've only known Christ for about 20 of them." And that took me back. This guy was a priest. He had been serving, but yet he had not seen clearly enough. What is it that holds us back? What is it that causes us to be blind? I guarantee that there are parts of my life that I am completely blind. Even though I can see, spiritually, I still struggle. I'm still blind. I'm still blind to the fact of many things. I still struggle with that sin that I wrestle with daily in my life. And I pray for the deliverance. I pray for God to tear the gates of my heart off so that way he can be free to come into my life. I pray for him to kill that lion that seeks to destroy and devour me. Satan is like a roaring lion, we are told in the scriptures. He goes to and fro. I pray that God will destroy that lion, and that I will have the understanding and the wisdom to understand the difference that I need to have between guilt and my conviction. What it is that God is calling me to do, and what it is that Satan is trying to lead me to do. But the thing is, in order for me to hear God's voice clearly, I got to be able to take those blinders off. I got to be able to extract all the things that's dividing me from truly seeing who Christ is, so that way I can be that light. At the beginning of the gospel, the disciples asked, who was it that sinned? This man or his parents? And Jesus said, neither. Neither this man nor his parents sinned that caused them to be blind. But it was so that the power of God could be made manifest in him. That the power of God could be shown in him. And while I am in the world, there is enough darkness, but I will be the light to the world. Can you imagine when Jesus put that mud on his eyes and the guy came back, one of the first things he saw was God. It's amazing to me. What is it that makes us blind? What is it that is making us to stumble through this life, groping, walking, searching, that's holding us back from truly becoming the people that we need to be? What is it? Is it fear, lust, pornography, anger, unforgiveness, adultery? Whatever you can imagine. Those are the things that make us spiritually blind. But the most dangerous blind people are the ones that cause other people to be blind. We can see it today. We're seeing it happen right now. Many, many parents leading their young children down a path of blindness. Leading their families down a path of ruin. And I pray that God will have mercy on us, that we have enough time to reach the people that need to see the light. But we need to learn from Samson. We need to learn from his example. Not his mistakes, from his example. Because it wasn't until he was blinded that he was able to see clearly. So today, as we celebrate this feast, the day, the Sunday before the Ascension, ask yourself, as I do myself, what is it that's making me blind? What is it that's causing me not to see my Lord and my God clearly enough so I can be the light to the people that I need to be a light to? My spouse, my children, my church members, my family, the random person at the store. Ask. Because sometimes we're the only light that those people see. No matter how you feel inside, no matter how sick you are, no matter how angry you are, be that light to the world. And let us glorify and praise the name of the Lord, so we can see clearly. In the name of the Father, and the Holy Spirit, Christ is